So thanks everyone for coming to this event. Just to give a brief background, my name is Phil Dickens. I'm a PCS member, a member of the PCS union in Britain. We represent UK civil servants and other workers across the government and also the devolved governments that we've got here in the UK. And as part of the Rank and File Network, which is an initiative aimed at trying to encourage more on the ground grassroots organising and particularly building up that confidence and strength in the workplace rather than everything kind of relying on central union office to do the work. We've been holding these events to talk about different perspectives and things that workers have been doing in various different situations to try and build that strength elsewhere. So today we've really privileged and really lucky to have an international perspective on a lot of these issues. So we've got Erek Slater, who's here from Chicago, and also Fabio Bosco from Brazil, who are going to talk about their different perspectives, not only in relation to the struggles that they've gone through, but also about the importance of workers organising and reaching across those national borders and about internationalism. Why that's such an important building block of workers' solidarity and the movement. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Erek first. He's going to talk about his situation and some of his perspectives, and then from there move on to Fabio, who will do the same. And then once they've had a chance to speak and introduce things, we'll open up for questions and any comments or any additions anyone else wants to put into the mix. So Erek, over to you.
Well, thank you, Phil, and everyone else who's organized this. This is I think our third exchange since the last few months, and I think this is an important exchange over the Atlantic Ocean between worker militants and unionists, social justice fighters in Britain, the United States, but also internationally. As Phil just said, we're going to be recording this and letting people know about it and the experiences that we've learned in many countries. So I first wanted to thank the PCS union and those involved in the rank and file group, as well as the independent left, who've helped to organize this and several other actions. I want to thank the Liverpool Trade Union Council, who very quickly put out a statement of solidarity and support when I was unjustly fired from my job of 15 years at the Chicago Transit Authority. Okay, so a little bit about myself real quickly. I live in Chicago, the United States. It's about 6 o'clock in the morning right now. It's very cold. It's about 5 degrees, maybe -10 with the what we call wind chill. I live with my partner and our 3 kids. Hopefully they won't wake up and mess up this meeting in a minute. So like I said, I've been a bus driver for the city for about 15 years. And I've also been a shop steward for the last about 7 years for my coworkers, about 600 families in Chicago that are driving the buses for the Chicago Transit Authority. I want to make clear that I don't speak for the union. For informational purposes, I am a delegate to the International Constitutional Conventions. I'm also, like I said, I'm fired from the CTA, but we intend to return to that workplace. But I don't speak for the Chicago Transit Authority. I do want to make, just for everyone to know, I'm a member of La Voz de los Trabajadores, or Workers' Voice, which is an organization of working people in the United States. And we just recently reached the threshold to become an official part of the International Workers' League. We have enough members just a few days ago, so that's a wonderful thing. I just want to let people know that. Okay, so first I just wanted to talk about the emergency situation going on here in the United States, in Chicago, and among transit workers in particular, which I'm more familiar with. Right now I'm driving nurses to the hospital, so I'm also familiar a bit with that. So right now we're reaching about 450,000 people have died from COVID-19 in the United States. My union, International Union, both in Canada and the United States, has about 120 or over 120 workers have died from COVID-19. I understand it's hard to get the data, but over 12 transit workers in Chicago Transit Authority has died. Those numbers do not include family members who've died from coworkers who've brought the sickness to those family or community members. And it certainly doesn't include the many thousands of people who've been seriously hurt by this. We're currently scrambling to get vaccines. There's some people who don't want to take it, but among those who do want to take it, it's difficult to get it. We were told on February 1st that we are quote unquote essential workers. A lot of us feel that our labor is essential, but our human life is not so essential. And we're not able to get that very easily. So people are scrambling to go to hospitals and so on. At least so far, hopefully by the end of the month, some of the employers will be distributing the vaccine. But that's still a struggle right now. I hear that's also going in the UK. So the other problems we've been having since the beginning of this pandemic, like I said, the vaccine, but also testing. We're still not doing asymptomatic testing at the work site. A lot of the politicians are talking about, people having parties and Super Bowl, American football, we call it here, in saying it's our fault for living our lives, but yet they're still not taking measures at the work sites to mitigate this disease, the spread of it, etc. So things like testing, proper PPE or protective equipment, the proper amount of time, workers to do the work. And then another issue is the time off. If right now there's a potential strike going on with the Chicago Teachers Union, and they're facing off with the city administration, and to a degree at this point, so far a success as far as I can see, by forcing the city to stop their rollout plan for in-person teaching, and a lot of support has been given to the teachers and the support staff of the schools. But a lot of the fight is over workers who have themselves underlying conditions and family members who live in their homes. And disproportionately, that's affecting Black and Brown, Black and Latino families. Disproportionately, Black and Brown families are in these workplaces which cannot be done remotely and have less access to healthcare, et cetera, often live in more crowded housing situations with multiple different generations. So it's a question of class, it's a question of race, of inequality and lack of access. It's a concern about control of working class priorities of health and safety. So right now, like I said, we're in extreme cold in Chicago. The last few days we had a big snowstorm. Much of the East Coast as well had it. And we've been in a fight in my bus garage, about 600 workers. We've been in a fight to demand that the employer have what's called warming buses set up because we're forced into unpaid breaks during the day in these what's called swing shifts, and we're just thrown on the street. Oftentimes we go into a restaurant or something, but they're often closed because of the COVID-19, or it's unsafe to do so. So we've been demanding those buses. At the same time, management, I've been hearing reports. I just got back from a board meeting a few weeks ago, and there's reports of management going after workers who have, properly informed their employer that they've gotten COVID-19. And the employer asks the questions, which you could argue is appropriate. Well, who did you become in contact with? And so the worker doesn't think anything of it and names his coworkers. Well, management is now going after every single one of those workers with behavioral violations, potentially firing them for doing the right thing of informing a social authority to try to let everyone else know. So oftentimes we've been asking workers to tell the union instead of the employer. And that's really horrible because that's disincentivizing workers from doing the right thing of trying to stop the spread to our communities. And that's really egregious in my view. Another concern we've had for a long time is the split between part-time and full-time. I understand you guys in Britain have a problem with what you guys call casualization of employment, temporary, part-time work, oftentimes not with the collective power of a union, splitting us in all kinds of different ways between race, gender, shifts, our working conditions, and an employer really does that in transit. We've seen this split between part-time Definitely. So those are some of the direct conditions we're facing. I wanted to make sure that was brought to light. Okay, so one of the reasons why you asked me on this call was to talk about workplace democracy and the need to fight to defend workers' organizations when we use them. And I myself have unfortunately some personal experience with being targeted because I was elected to be a shop steward and an executive board member of my union. I've been fired twice, and I'll just briefly talk about those cases and also the importance of international solidarity. So in 2016, I was fired by the employer with a behavioral violation for giving a cease and desist order to management when they were breaking the contract. And they say, how dare, you can't tell us what to do. You're just a bus driver. But it's important that workers have a contract, that they have representatives of their choosing, and that the contract has teeth. And there's consequences when the employer breaks their written agreements with the workers' union, with our collective power. So we had, so when I was fired, people like Fabio invited me down to Brazil to an international conference fighting against the privatization of public transportation. And wow, it really opened up my eyes to the fight which was going on, the different conditions happening. There were so many people from Africa, from Europe, from South and Central America and Asia, which were leading fights on these questions that I didn't even know about. I physically got to meet them, and that was a really wonderful thing. So then I met this organization called CSP Con Lutas, which I hope Fabio can talk more about, and also the International Workers League. And I was able to see the power directly because we then got statements of support from all over the world to get me back to work and to also discuss the working conditions of my coworkers and to make the employer pay a bigger political price whenever they do this to any of us, especially workers' elected representatives. We got to go to, like I said, Brazil, and then another international solidarity organization out of Japan, Dorochiba Union, which had led a struggle against privatization of the rail work in Japan. They fought, and to a degree, a losing battle, and many of their workers were laid off over a 10, 20, 30-year period. But they still have an international solidarity committee, and every year they go to Korea as an important way of connecting workers physically in their struggle, and especially because it's a relationship of domination for many generations between Japan and Korea. And they were protesting that domination as Japanese. In a similar way, I think the United States and Britain have similar responsibilities as imperially powerful international countries, with a long history of that, of the domination of working people, etc. That it's important that workers in places like Europe, the United States, make direct connections to places which the government they're part of may not be their government, but the government that which in the country they live in is harming the working conditions and living conditions and organizational ability of workers internationally. So that was a good example. We went to Japan, from Japan to Korea, and what was going on at that time was it was 1 million people in the streets every Saturday fighting with students and workers, massively organized, 1 million people out of a country with only a few million in it, in Seoul, and they were able to successfully remove the president from office. And there was they also had a strike of transit workers there. It was an important experience directly to see it. Okay, so fast forward to 4 years, just a few months ago, back in May. Again, I'm in my 3rd term as an executive board member for my coworkers, elected and reelected. And in May, there was, of course, the coronavirus was starting to become a major issue in the United States. And at that same time, the police murdered another Black person. And, I'm calling this a state murder, a racist state murder. That's my view. But the main thing that was going on was that that was important to transit workers was that some of the transit workers in Minneapolis, especially in New York and elsewhere, took a stand. They said, we're not going to drive the police to attack the protests, the legitimate protests. We're not going to carry shackled protesters on our public transit buses. And several did this very publicly. And what was important is the union, the Amalgamated Transit Union 10005 Minneapolis, supported them publicly, had meetings quickly of the ranks, or supported the politics of the demonstrations, which is very important. And then our international union, representing about 200,000 families at that time, they put out a statement, a very good statement in my view, saying that workers have the right to work in safe conditions. And that includes safe from the pandemic, but also safe from police going to these demonstrations and possibly physically confronting them, and that they called this a misuse of public transportation. And our executive board met, I believe, on the 29th of May, and our vice president put a motion forward to support our brothers and sisters in Minneapolis who took a stand, and I seconded that motion, and then it carried unanimously in the board. And that weekend, there was a massive protest in Chicago. There was over 1,000 people, in my view, unjustly arrested, and they shut down the public transit system. There was a lockout of us as workers, in a closing of the bridges. At least later, we have a waterway that circles the center of the city. And to both stop legitimate protests from coming to the center of the city and also trap them within there, to then immediately put in these laws saying it was illegal to be outside of your home after a certain hour, and you couldn't get home because you took the bus or the train to get to the protest in the first place. And so this was a real misuse of public transportation. So in these contexts, I, as a shop steward, what is my responsibility? Is to talk to my coworkers about what they want to do, what they want their union power to do on their interests, and to listen to them. So I did that. I read the international president's statement of our international union, and then I asked if workers felt safe driving the police to these working class neighborhoods. And many workers said no, or some of them said no. Other people did it, but some of them said no. But the real problem wasn't so much that there was some disagreement and so on, but the problem is management immediately attacked our right to have these democratic discussions. They came in, called me names, threatened to fire me, threatened to call the police, and they did both those things, immediately calling the Chicago Police Department, which I think is important to make clear. Throughout all this, and it's been a long time, the police have been 100% on the side of management. They're not some kind of independent arbiter here. They follow the orders of management, even when we have a contractual right as a union to have a representative on the property. We have a contractual, legal, we're even arguing constitutional right to our First Amendment rights to have a speech, to have discussions amongst each other, as we've done for many years. I have done many hundreds of times, and the problem was they didn't like the content of the discussion. They didn't agree, and they were concerned that workers would make collective decisions and use their union to possibly withhold their labor in support of these mass demonstrations against police violence against Blacks. And that's the reason why they shut us down. And that's the reason why they removed me from service. That's what they call the police. Again, and that's why I think this has gotten a lot of international support. It's largely because the mass movement itself was so powerful, right? So there has been many murders of Black people in the United States and internationally, and many of them have been caught on camera. Even in Chicago, we just had one, a few years back, Laquan McDonald. You might have heard of it. It's just 16 shots in a cover-up, and that itself, nearly the mayor of Chicago was almost had to flee the city for that. And now this mass mobilization, and it was national. It was deep. It was in some of the places which you never seen a demonstration since the 60s, right? In rural areas. And it was multi-ethnic, multiracial, and powerful people thinking through what is going on here? What is the systemic roots of racism? What are police here for, right? What is their real role in society? And that was going on. And a lot of the, so through the help of the International Workers League, CSP Conlutas, we were able to get over 12 countries, over a dozen countries, sometimes multiple labor organizations in each country to put statements of support. Yes, for me to return me back to work as a militant, but primarily because of the solidarity with the movement for Black lives and to stop racist state murder. Primarily also, they understood the importance of workers' rights to elect their representative of their choice, of to be able to talk, to have freedom of speech and assembly at the workplace, in their unions, and the right to have a union in the first place. So the other thing was the connection between the workers' movement and social justice struggles. The fight for women's liberation, the fight for Black equality, Black liberation, etc. That those things were seen as a potential of combining, and instead of just having you know, a small number of people in the streets relatively, and for the big business press to be able to argue that it was just youth and people were smashing property or being irresponsible. Instead, there was the potential of the disciplined, respected sections of society, which working people are, leaders of families and leaders of community, to, through their organizations such as unions, to organize disciplined, nonviolent mass demonstrations to show that this is not acceptable. We will not accept another Black person be murdered by the state. And furthermore, that this was a potential for some of the national organizations and international organizations to take action, potentially even strike action, industrial action, to say not again. And the city and national rulers would have to back off. You know, they need their economy running, and make sure some of these police have murdered Black people would be in jail right now if we were able to mobilize that power, that legitimate power. So I just want to finish by introducing you know, my friend and comrade Fabio Bosco, who was so patient to explain so many things to me in English when I came visit his home in Brazil, and I was so impressed by his union and their democratic forms. The Transit Workers Union in Sao Paulo, one of the biggest cities in the world. He was he's retired now, but he's been a longtime transit worker, and he was one of the leaders, the rank and file leaders on the picket line in the 2014 strike, right around the big football game and the World Cup in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And he was one of you know, I think 41 workers who were unjustly fired, like me, and were able to win their jobs back with back pay through an international struggle. So I hope he can talk a little bit that he's quite internationalist. Thank you so much for coming, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks very much for that, Eric. Right, Fabio, do you want to come in and say a little bit?
Yes. Okay. Phil, thank you for having me. Hello, Martin, Eric, Sean, Jonathan, Louis, Matt, and Herbert. Look, I think that the discussion we are having here is very important because labor rights are under attack all over the world. And we need to figure out how the working class can find the means to fight back, to stand up and fight back. Here in Brazil, in the last few years, due to the economic downturn, the state and the capitalists altogether, they carried out reforms in labor laws, they carry out social security reform, so strong attacks against the rights of the working class. Recently, due to the pandemic, they created new laws that allowed the bosses to cut wages together with working hours, which was a strong attack that affected something around 10 million workers across the country. And now they are talking about what they call an administrative reform against public employees. So all these attacks, we must figure out how to fight back. And I listened to Erek's speech just before me, and Erek raised very important issues. One of them is the need for democratic and militant labor union. This is critical. Without workers' democracy, it's very difficult to bring the working class together in order to stand up. So I think this is one of the critical issues. And the other one that Erek also reminded us is about the necessity to link the struggles, to link labor to the social struggles that are happening in each country, as the example of the struggle for justice for George Floyd, which Erek was involved in trying to build solidarity between the bus drivers and the social movement. Here in Brazil, we built a labor federation that is a labor and people's federation, because we understand that we must interact, we must put together labor and social movements and movements against oppression, so that we can build a larger, a stronger resistance to the backlash that comes from the state and from the bosses, from the capitalists. And at last, I'd like to talk about internationalism. Many times people believe, oh, yes, internationalism is a nice idea, but we see the issue of internationalism as a necessity. It's a necessity for the working class to fight back. We have strong examples. I have Herbert here with us. He could tell us a little bit more about that. Here in Brazil, one of the unions, of the 150 unions that are affiliated to CSP Conlutas, is the Metal Workers Union in an industrial area, in the industrial city of São José dos Campos. It's near São Paulo. And there is a huge General Motors plant there. And what happened? For 10 years, the union, through workers' democracy and a very militant approach, they managed to stop many setbacks against on labor rights. But what was happening in other places in Brazil, in other General Motors plants in Brazil, these labor rights cuts were being implemented. And so we were becoming a kind of island. And this is very, very problematic, because there will be a solution in the end. Either they will cut the labor rights of everyone, or we will manage to expand this militant approach and defend labor rights everywhere. It's not possible to make an island. And the same workers, with the same work internationally. General Motors is an international company. So they choose the place they are going to produce and what they do it for what's better for their business. And either the working class organize the necessary links between workers across the borders, or the bosses will choose which one will be targeted each time. So we understand that internationalism is a necessity. Without it, it will be very difficult to keep labor and social rights across the world. Just to end, I would like to give 2 examples of campaigns that we have been involved in the last 2 years. On top of the campaign to rehire Erek, which we are deeply involved, we are also working a lot on the solidarity to political prisoners in Chile, the Chilean people started an uprising in 2019, in October, and there are something around 2,000 activists that are in jail because of this uprising, of this revolution. And so there is an international campaign, and CSP Com Lutas, we are proud that CSP Com Lutas is one of the organizations that carry out this campaign of solidarity to demand the Chilean authorities to set all these political prisoners free. And another campaign is related to a struggle that happened in Argentina in 2017 against the social security reform, where when 3 activists are being charged for actions to stop the reform. One of them, his name is Sebastian Romero. He was on the run for 1 year. Finally, the state managed to pick up him in Uruguay, and he was in jail. Recently, he was set free, what we are very happy to tell you. But still he and Daniel Ruiz, another guy that stayed in jail for 1 year for this action against the social security, and another guy, Cesar Aracaki, the 3 of them are being charged for this struggle. And so we are working here in Brazil to build the solidarity with them. And maybe the most important thing we did in terms of international solidarity is to build an international network with brothers and sisters in many countries. The most important organizations in this labor network is a labor federation in France called Solidaire, and another one in Spain called CGT. So we 3 together with 100 organizations across the world, we put forward the International Labor Network for Solidarity and Struggle. We try to build these links among the working class as a whole, and also through sections of the working class, auto workers, public employees, transit workers, etc., oil workers, etc. So I'm glad to be here with you, and I will give back the word to Phil so that we can have the others to have their input. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabio. Thanks for that. I think just before we open things up, an observation I want to make, particularly hearing a lot of the stuff that Erek and Fabio said, but particularly inspirational stuff. I know from the UK, there's a quite conservative tendency in some trade unions and trade unionists, and I'm sure this is mirrored in other countries as well, but there's this tendency to kind of present workers' rights in a very and workers' struggles in a very narrow context, and a lot of these people kind of present it as workers' rights as a very and wider issues of equality, whether it's racial justice or women's rights or LGBT rights, or fighting for disability rights is somehow separate and not something to be concerned with. These are the same sort of people who suggest that workers and workers' unions shouldn't be involved in politics, and obviously they can be quite nationalist in their perspectives as well, rather than internationalist. And I think the examples that you've brought are really useful in highlighting just how wrong that perspective is, and just how much all of these areas overlap, and why we do need to make sure that, because the working class in all its diversity across the whole globe, we do need to be building links across with each other, and making sure that we're involved in all those fights for, where we need to fight oppression and fight against our exploitation, and obviously the unjust treatment that we face in all those areas. So yeah, I'll open it up now if people want to raise their hands, if they want to ask a question or make a contribution. And while this is going, depending on how many we've got, I'll either bring Erek and Fabio back at the end or in intervals to answer some of the questions that we've had. And then in the meantime, if there's any links that you've got, particularly to like the campaigns you've got going on at the moment, whether it's fundraisers or campaign pages, if you want to pop those in the chat, we can use them when we share the video of this. We can obviously make sure that we promote those to make sure that as many people as possible are aware of that, and where there's something they can do like donate or whatever else, then we encourage them to do so. So yeah, does anyone want to go first? Okay, Martin.
Thanks, Phil. And thanks for organising all the stuff behind the scenes. I know it takes a lot of work to get these things together. And I also want to bring greetings to you, to Erek and to Fabio from the Liverpool TUC. I'm Vice President of the Liverpool TUC, and we had Erek to speak to us, and that was very good. But at the same time, we're here today just to say that we want to continue that support, and we will work with any of your rank and file organizations, Phil, that you're connected with, and see how we can deepen this. I just wanted to mention a few things, just to illustrate, if you like, the desire. I think Phil's right about the tradition in this country. You know, in the mainstay, it doesn't follow the real question of internationalism in the way that Erek and Fabio outlined. But nevertheless, just to give you one example, when the Liverpool dock workers in the 90s went on strike for nearly 4 years, they received enormous support, and they started to write to every port in the world that they could. And then they followed that up with visits to as many ports in Europe, Japan, the United States, and so on. And I remember it because Erek mentioned the railway workers from Japan, and they sent over 2 delegations. I can't remember the exact day, but 1996 or 97, something like that. And you know, they pledged their support and organized in Japan. I think it's very likely the same union, but it was certainly railway workers, and there was a lot of young people there from Japan, and singing the International in Japan at the end of the meeting of these 500 dock workers was kind of very impressive. But I also want to bring greetings from the International Socialist League, and because I'm a member of that, I attended the last Congress of International Workers League and met Erek for the first time about 2.5 years ago, I think, something like that. So we can make these connections in many different ways. And without explaining in too much detail about the situation in this country, many things are similar, as Erek explained. I just looked up the latest statistic about health workers, for example, not getting enough PPE and so on, and being really disregarded by the government. 52,000 National Health Service workers have been off sick with COVID. 850 have died. And you could say the same thing in workplaces. I don't know the number, but certainly hundreds have died in the building sites, because whatever lockdown was happening, they didn't happen to building workers, because many of them are precarious. And that was a huge problem in this country. If you're precarious, you go to work, whether you've got COVID or not, because the government help is obviously extremely insufficient. And also, as Phil said, the leadership of the unions here, well, they've become extremely inactive in many ways, but there's some unions that haven't. There's a strike at this moment of the United Voices of the World, one of those organizations, I know Phil knows them as well. They now have 3,200 members. They're starting they've just finished, I think, their second 5-day strike action in care home called Sage in London. It's a small strike, but it represents in many ways the interests and conditions all care workers are facing. So if it wins, certainly it can have a very big effect. Those are some of the things I just wanted to say. But in terms of developing this campaign and in fact this meeting, we have very good connections with Black Lives Matter in Liverpool and connections in the Northwest. And very clearly that got a huge new lease of life by what happened in the United States. And directly responding to that, they held rally after rally, demonstrations, all kinds of fights against racism. And also listening to what happened to Erek and so on, because really that history is part of the Black Lives Matter movement in their fight. So they always allowed me to speak. So I've spoken at 4 or 5 Black Lives Matter. I'm in constant contact with the organizers. Obviously with the lockdown and so on, it's not so easy to organize rallies like they did in September, but nevertheless, they're still fighting. And in that area, we can, Phil, if you said you'd record this, we can make sure that it goes there. We will send it also to Liverpool TUC, which means it will get circulated up to all the unions in Liverpool. And that we will continue to build in whatever way we can, and obviously in unity with yourselves. So in that sense, full power to your rank and file organizations for organizing this, and let's build from here. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Martin. Matt, did you want to come in next?
Yeah, thanks. Can comrades hear me? Hello, everybody. Yeah, cheers. Sorry, my camera doesn't work, which is perhaps good from your point of view, because you don't want to be looking at my ugly mug. But yeah, just for those comrades who don't know me or have not met me before, I'm in the same union as Phil. We're also in the same caucus. I use that term sort of loosely because it tends to translate better, I think, into the American and possibly other countries sort of or faction, but I don't like that word. But we organise in our union as a sort of left opposition group, but within our group, there's people from a number of different organisations and none. We organise around a common programme which pushes rank and file trade unionism and a number of key principles that socialists organise around, such as workers' representatives on the workers' wage, election of all officials, that sort of thing. A fighting union, basically, turning the union round and making it a members-led union, which is something that our leadership have been espousing for a number of years, but they haven't carried out in practice. And that was a point I was going to make in response to some of the other points that have been made. Yeah, we need to fight capitalism, and we need to create organisations or transform our organisations so they're equipped to do that. But we're also face a fight not just against capitalism, but against the agents of capitalism within our own movement. And that's how the federations such as CSP, Conlutus, and Solidaires have developed. They've developed I think, in the teeth of that opposition within the workers' movement. There are people, as Phil says, there are conservative elements within the union that within the union movement everywhere. Some of them consciously represent the interests of the ruling class. Some of them represent those interests subconsciously. In effect, it's the class forces playing out within our own organisations, because our unions aren't separate from wider society. So we've got a job of work to do, and Fabio and others have already made the points that it's about collective effort. It's about making those links, and it's about not allowing capitalism to get away with it. And that means also clearing out our own organisations and transforming our own organisations. And that's something that in Britain in our union that we're doing, we're doing sort of small things, but that's where it starts. We're having those conversations with people. We're posing an alternative to, quite frankly, it's a continuation of business unionism, despite the rhetoric in a lot of unions. And Martin makes the point that there are struggles ongoing, and a lot of those struggles are happening in spite of that conservative leadership of the unions, from top to bottom. I think some of those struggles will be happening because some bureaucrats within the unions are trying to, hold on to their relevance, justify their existence, and some will be happening in spite of. And I'm talking in terms of the official unions or the TUC affiliated unions. I think that, we don't know what's going to happen exactly, but I think there will be splits and fusions within the movement, within the sort of official trade union movement. Even in Britain, I think, once the working class starts to move, there may well be different sort of trade union federations that emerge. We've seen the emergence of independent unions such as UVW, which, as Martin says, are quite small and isolated in pockets, but are actually showing, setting a real example. They're winning things, and they're not just winning things. They're winning things industrially, but they're winning things through using all the other tools that are available to unions, because the people who in the leadership, if you like, of those unions are prepared to use those tools to win victories for the class, rather than just justify the existence of the organisation. And we've got a real battle going on at the moment within our union, and it'll be a battle that's going on in every single union everywhere to some degree. I mean, just to bring it back round to the situation we find ourselves in. I mean, the coronavirus is, in a way, has given a great get-out clause for some of the more conservative elements in our movement over the last year, because in Britain we've even seen an almost collaborationist approach. The TUC and the government almost joining hands. And what we're up against, the transfer of wealth is just unbelievable. I saw some figures today, or over the last few days. Some official research by the International Labour Organization shows that the decrease in earnings of the world's workers during 2021 due to the coronavirus was some 3.7 trillion. The increase in wealth, according to Oxfam's research of the world's billionaires during the first 10 months of coronavirus, was 3.9 trillion. So 3.7 trillion and 3.9 trillion, almost the same. So that transfer of wealth continued as corona ripped through the world. And as Martin said, it's the working class who suffers from the coronavirus the most. It's those people who have to continue going to work. It's those people that can't shield. It's those people that have to do the jobs which, in effect, are leading to the spread of the virus, and also to try and combat the spread of the virus, such as in healthcare. So that's what we're up against, and we've got a battle within our own organisations in order to make them fit for purpose. And it won't always be possible to transform organisations. There will have to be breaks and splits and fusions within our organisations, and that's part of a worldwide process. It's a combined and uneven thing, but there'll be similarities and there'll be differences, but it's all interconnected, and we can perhaps see the dots. I mean, we can perhaps join up the dots, but we need to help our fellow workers join those dots up as well. Anyway, I'll stop there, Phil. I thank you for indulging me. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, thanks very much, Matt. There's no other hands at the moment up, so what I'll do is if Fabio or Eric want to comment on any of the stuff that's been said so far, what I'll do, I'm going to chuck in a bit of a question myself. Particularly, one of the things I'm interested in, I know we've been talking a lot about kind of in some parts, but I think particularly in the UK, there's certainly an issue around the decline of unionism in a lot of ways, and particularly more conservative elements of unionism dominating things. So I'm interested in, one, how building those kind of international links can help combat that sort of thing. And also, when you build an international solidarity campaigns, obviously it's important to get workers from different countries meeting each other and talking to each other. But I'm presuming generally, like the ideal form of this, particularly in really big struggles, is to build up to things like international strikes. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on how we can make that sort of thing more commonplace, and that sort of thing. So, Erek, do you want to come back first?
Well, I think a way of starting to answer that question, I was wondering if Herbert, if he's there, if he could speak a little bit about the direct situation they're facing right now, and in his workplaces, and how they're reaching out internationally to win better conditions for workers. And if also Sean from Atlanta, if he could also talk a little bit, maybe about what the Amazon workers are doing currently. If he in the United States, and a lot of people are watching that. I was just hoping one of you guys or both of you guys could speak.
Okay, just before I bring Sean in then, Herbert, are you able to speak or not at the moment?
Friends, sorry, I'm on the streets because this I can open my camera. I can. I think Fabio talking talking all about the importance of the international solidarity, the campaigns of CSP com Lutas. I'm in other campaign, international campaign that I'm involved in my union, and the CSP com Lutas involved. Is a campaign, an international campaign now against the closure of the Ford plants in Brazil. The North American company Ford, automaker, announced last month closed three plants of the factories in Brazil. This is an important international campaign now of CSP com Lutas. We involved with others labor federations in Brazil. All labor federations in Brazil are involved in this campaign, and I would like to send a solidarity for Erek in this campaign, and thank you for this meeting, and thank you for opportunity to share these international struggles of the workers.
Yeah, and thank you very much for coming along. It really does mean a lot to be able to hear all these perspectives. Sean, do you want to come in now then?
Sure, yeah. So one thing that's been happening in the United States, I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, in the U.S. South. I'm a teacher. And one of the things that's sort of caught the attention of a lot of the labor movement and a lot of militants in the United States is an organizing drive that's going on at a Amazon fulfillment center in Bessemer, Alabama, which is just outside of Birmingham. It's a town that's about 80%. I think 80% of the workforce is Black, and obviously in a place that the U.S. South is sort of a historically weak portion of the United States when it comes to labor organizing and things like that. So Amazon has been pushing an effort to attempt to hamper this organizing process. They filed to have the certification election pushed back, but that was recently undone by the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board. So the election to certify this union, which would be the first officially certified union in Amazon in the United States, begins on Monday. There's a series of rallies that are being organized in support of these workers this weekend, and I believe on the 20th as well. So I think it's an interesting campaign that we all need to keep our eyes on, and it particularly lends itself to amplifying this question of internationalism, because in much the same way as the campaign of the CSP com Lutas comrades in Brazil against the closure of the Ford plants, these are international companies that freely move their capital across borders, and the only way that we can adequately combat that is for our labor movement to also be international and to have those links. And Amazon is the new big daddy of this. Amazon, is this massive international company. I don't know if it's quite as monopolistic elsewhere as it is in the United States, but it certainly feels like the only place you can go to order things online or whatever, what have you. It's the only way to have an effective labor campaign against Amazon is in an international context. So I think that's important. And then one other thing I just wanted to comment on is, my own position as a teacher in the South. Where I live in Georgia, it's actually illegal for teachers to collectively bargain at all. So there's no teachers unions, and we have very few labor rights. And I think in that context, it's important for us to remember that international solidarity can be very important morale boost, and can very effectively bolster the work that organizers are doing in particularly difficult circumstances, whether that be the context of sort of formal illegality here in the U.S. South, or that be in the context of actual sort of violent repression and things like that elsewhere. It's international solidarity and that recognition of the work and the feeling of being part of something bigger that can really keep you going in those hardest of times when you're fired from your job, for example. And so international solidarity is one of the watchwords of the labor movement that often sort of falls away in the eyes of the national leaderships of these bureaucratic leaderships of these unions, but something that we need to make sure is part of our campaign to sorry, my cat is very loud. As part of our campaign to take back our labor movement and make it a militant and fighting one. International solidarity is central to that. I'll stop there.
Well, thanks very much for that perspective, Sean, and obviously thanks to you, Kat, for contributions as well. Okay, Fabio, do you want to come back on anything at this point?
Just a couple of remarks. Matt mentioned this issue of capitalism, and I really agree that we must put all this labor and people's struggles into anti-capitalist perspective. You see, the CSP com Lutas explicitly stands for socialism based on workers' democracy, and we need to have a solution that goes to the roots of the problem, and the roots of the problem is the capitalist system. So either we dismantle, we destroy, we fight back capitalism, or capitalism will always be playing against us, against the labor rights, against social rights. So I think that's something we definitely agree upon. The other issue is, Matt also raised the issue of business unionism, and Phil asked us to comment on the issue of the decline of labor. Yes, I think that the main problem we have is this business unionism, this partnership between capital and labor, because this probably today, in terms of labor, the majority of labor leaders, the labor officials, they play exactly on these cards, you see. So for instance, internationally, the main labor federation, the ITUC, is full business unionism. The other labor federation, we have another problem. The World Federation of Trade Unions, they are connected to oppressive regimes like the Chinese one. So a couple of years ago, there came to Brazil a delegation from this federation, and they were opposed to the people's protests in Hong Kong. We need to build a different kind of unionism, you see? Unionism that stay away from business unionism on the one side, and on the other side, that has no connections, no links, that is fully independent from any government, that's fully independent from the capitalists. So this is the way to build a rank and file, a democratic, a militant labor movement. That's the way we believe that it will be possible to rebuild it, in connection with social struggles and connections across the borders. That's the way I think we will revive the labor movement.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just to say, I agree completely there. Right, we've not got any other hands up at the moment. One of the other things, just kind of remarking on that, I think it's probably useful in the context of business union and labour decline, as you phrased it, which I think is probably a really apt phrase. Just to talk briefly about my own union, PCS, and in particular in relation to my employer. So I work for HM Revenue and Customs, which is basically the UK's tax authority. And one of the things that we've been facing recently is, like the last 2 weeks in particular, have been hectic in relation to the pay offer that we've just been made. So it's been no secret for the last decade, civil servants, government workers across the UK have been subject to first a pay freeze and then pay restraints, so like 1% rises for 10 years, all under the guise of austerity following the global financial crisis. And this has created numerous problems, as you can imagine, but in HMRC in particular, one of the things that the bosses have been saying for a long time is that they want to address this, they want to address low pay, but the only way that they see to do this, which again should come as no surprise to anyone with experience in these things, is by reforming our contracts. So we've got workers on different contracts, and they want to bring them together. And as you can imagine, that's not about bringing everyone up to the best practice in terms of conditions, but it's about leveling down, and things that they see is antiquated, i.e. workers have it too good, they want to take those offers, and that's something that has been on the cards for a while, but the union leadership has effectively collaborated with this over the last 6 months while the negotiations have been going on. These have all been going on in secret. Even the group executive committee, which I'm a part of, wasn't able to know this for what was happening in these talks for the bulk of that time, and obviously members have been completely in the dark about this until we've reached the point now where the offer's just been published. It includes improvements for some people, detriments for a huge amount of people, and that's already divided the workforce. And those who are on newer contracts are looking at it and thinking, I get a pay rise, my conditions improve, and then those who've been in the department longer are looking at it and thinking, the pay rise is okay, but here's all the things I lose out. And that particularly affects those who are working lower grade workers, those who've got disabilities, care and responsibilities, those who are parents, lose out because of a lot of the stuff that's being imposed, particularly if you work in a customer service job, as it's being termed. And this is being recommended by the union, by a union leadership which proclaim themselves socialists. So, you know, they in theory stand for all the things that we've been talking about, and they're now playing into this divide between workers and doing it on the basis that they don't see any alternative to it. And I think that kind of defeatism, that sense that even when recognizing something's bad, feeling that there's no alternative to it, feeling that they don't have the power to break out of that is one of the more toxic effects, I suppose, of business unionism. I mean, on the right wing of the union, you'd have that sort of perspective where they'd actively say, well, we have to make compromises. This is the only way we can improve things. That's the nature of things. Whereas the left wing of business unionism, if you like, is kind of tries to not be playing to that, but then ultimately doesn't feel strong enough to fight it. And I think when we come to the concluding remarks at the end, I think one of the things that I've certainly seen is that seeing these international struggles and seeing those links between workers in different countries, you know, facing labour laws which might be as oppressive or more oppressive than ours in some cases. Particularly, Sean mentioned the example of you know, teachers not being allowed to collectively bargain at all, which is something that I wasn't aware of, and puts ours into perspective, and physical repression elsewhere, and seeing people still fight. That kind of inspiration can help us overcome this kind of defeatism and this cynicism, or I hope it can anyway. That's certainly something that I'd like to see in future. So that's just, I think, from my personal perspective, where things stand. And I think that's probably the big challenge in defeating this decline and building those links, is getting people past that sense that where they might agree or claim to agree with what we're talking about, but then feel that there's no alternative. You know, building an optimism, building a workers' movement rooted in this sense that actually, yeah, we do have that power and we can overcome these challenges, is going to be really important. So I'll stop there at this point. Martin's got his hands up to come back in. Just conscious of where we are with time. I think if anyone else puts the hand up who hasn't spoken yet after Martin, I'll bring them in as well. And then so we can wrap up by in about 15 minutes. I'll then bring Erek and Fabio back for any concluding remarks at that point. So Martin.
Okay, thanks, Phil. And you know, I agree with what you're saying. I wanted to give an example of a live development of building in this country at the moment. But before I do, I wanted to ask Phil if it's okay for us from this meeting to send international solidarity to the fight of the CSP conlutas over the Ford plants. And in sending that solidarity, what we can pledge to do is, with contacts that we have, or if we don't have contacts, we can send the material that Erek has just put up on the text about the closure of those factories. There's a Ford factory in Liverpool. I'm not sure how many Ford factories, but I think there's another 2, maybe one in Wales, I'm not sure. But and also, just to say, we haven't discussed it, but undoubtedly we will send solidarity from Liverpool to UC as well. And the example I wanted to give is in relation to the health workers struggle, because there are 14 unions, which all the leadership of whom all run along the lines that have been criticized in this meeting absolutely correctly. But because they've been treated absolutely shit, whether they die or not, whether they have enough PPE or not, whether they're paid or not, or the fact that there's 80,000 vacancies of nurses, etc. So unofficial committees started. They're not controlled by any union. There's something like 20 unofficial committees now in the different cities and regions, 3 in South Wales, 1 in Liverpool, Manchester, 1 or a number of them in London. One of our comrades is of the ISL student nurse, graduating soon, and is working with the unofficial committees. While this fight was going on, we noticed a very strong fight developing in Belgium of health workers beginning to do something similar, not exactly the same, but again, initiative from the rank and file. And they were linking with a union in France. I know a number of unions in France, but there was one that I didn't know. This was just purely health workers. And they made a statement towards the end of the last year saying that because of the lack of funding, because of the problems of health, there's not enough money. We have to strike, and we have to strike in 2021. So the nurses, we put some nurses in Liverpool and in Wales in touch with these committees in Belgium. And so the discussion is now beginning to develop. Now, these committees don't have the strength to call a strike tomorrow, but nevertheless, it's pushing in that kind of direction. And certainly they compose many militant health workers. And so there's a Liverpool nurse who had no experience of internationalism like this, wrote to the Belgium health workers, got a reply, and just making the first few steps of trying to link these things together, because the health system is a crisis of that is the same, I think, throughout Europe. So we have that we can begin in small ways to actually go along the path that Fabio and Herbert and Eric and Sean were talking about, and see how we can develop that. And I think that when it's put in the right way, I think we can go through all this nonsense with capitalism and with the bureaucracy and establish an important anti-capitalist feeling. So, for example, in Liverpool University, I'm retired, but I'm still on the committee. They've now just launching a ballot for strike action because during this COVID crisis, the authorities of the university want to sack 47 health, life and health science teachers and so on, all part of the drive for precariousness. So in small ways, I think there's quite a lot of action going on, and we can reach out to all of those. But there, and I think underneath that is, because of COVID, there is quite a great degree of anger that is not finding an expression, because the union leaderships many of them almost closed up shop during COVID. So what was being talked about Amazon, for example, same problem here. Massive exploitation of precarious workers. So that report will be very interesting as well. So that's just what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Okay, if I bring Matt back in next, and then at that point after Matt, we'll ask Fabio and Eric to make some concluding remarks. So, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I won't be long. I just wanted to sort of fill in behind you on what you said about PCS, because I think that's really important. And I mean, it's worth noting that we're going to take a oppositional stance to that. I would have imagined within HMRC, and campaign for members to vote no to the deal. And that's important because the union has supposedly got a strategy of having a national campaign over pay. As soon as you take a major chunk of the union out of that by advocating a deal which locks them into is it 3 years, 3-year pay deal? It takes them out of, it takes away the ability for us to launch a truly national campaign, because the only way we're actually going to be able to break the Treasury pay cap and get a decent pay rise for all our members in civil and public services is by having a national campaign. Now, what that looks like, obviously, is a matter of debate, and has been a major bone of contention for us over the years. But it goes back to the point that, if you hamper the ability of branches and groups and sections to take action, then you're also hampering the ability to build a national campaign, would be my point. I see it from both ends. So I think it's important that even if we don't necessarily win this time round, that we stamp that in people's collective memory, that there was somebody who spoke up and said, no, actually we should be fighting back on this and we mustn't isolate ourselves. I'm hoping that sounded optimistic rather than pessimistic, Phil, but I think it's important that we continue to make those arguments, and at the end of the day, if we keep organising, we will start to score victories, and it's those small victories you can then build on, and then the momentum sort of builds, it snowballs. I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. Okay, if we come back to you, Fabio, is there anything you want to say as far as concluding remarks?
I'd like to say two things. First, I'd like to thank you, Phil, for the opportunity to talk to all of you about these issues that are very important for us. The issue of democratic and militant labor, the issue of the connection with social struggles and international solidarity. And that's what we fight for. That's what we stand for. So we are always very happy. We are glad to have the opportunity to talk about that. And second, I'd like to make an invitation. Here, we have some people that are members of the International Labor Network, Martin, Erek, and me. And this year, we are going to have some activities. One of them has public employees. Others deals with issues. And in September, I don't know if it would be possible, we will have an in-person meeting in France. So I'd like to invite you, Phil, Sean, Jonathan, Matt, to attend one of these meetings so that you will be in touch with one organization that's not the ITUC, that's not the World Federation of Trade Unions, but it's a network that's very active, and I think it will be instrumental for the development of the working class across the world. So with these words, I thank you once again, and let's keep in touch. I'll send you the invitation, okay, for the activities we are going to have. Thank you, man.
Thank you very much. And just to say, if the opportunity is granted, obviously we don't know where we'll be with the pandemic, but that does sound like something I'd be very interested in coming along to if it's possible. Okay, Erek, anything from yourself as far as concluding remarks?
Yeah, I'll respond to a few things that were brought up and then try to conclude a bit. So again, thank you, Phil, and I think Matt put us in contact with you. I wanted to thank him as well for doing that, and of course I met Martin a few years back. Thank you for helping to organize this interchange between U.S. workers and British, but also international. Obviously, we have several Brazilians on the call as well. I think that's very important. We should do more of this and save our connections, make sure we have a direct line of connection. A few things were brought up in just broadly speaking. Another way of doing international work, we have an advantage in the UK and the United States, is that there's a lot of nationalities from other countries that come to these countries. And just a few days ago, my organization, La Voz, or the Voice of Working People, we had a public meeting, about 50 workers, about immigrant rights and the struggles of immigrant workers in the United States. And that turns out to be, when you have a serious discussion about this, about the working and living conditions in the countries where many of these workers come from or came from in the previous generation. And that's an important feature of the working class in the United States, and I believe also in the United Kingdom. And so that's a very practical way internationalism can be done, and it also affects you on the job. The job currently now is about 1/3 Caucasian, 1/3 Latino, 1/3 Black, and come from these different experiences, and it really helps on the job organizing when you have an international perspective. I found that very explicitly the case. You know, the place where I work, where I've worked for 14 years, the Chicago Transit Authority, is about 90% African American. And one thing that's going on right now, I think, is in Chicago with the Chicago Teachers Union going up against the city administration, is the question of Black liberation, of equality that's being discussed right now, very high-pitched back and forth between the city administration and the workers as organized through the union. And the fact that the teachers have voted to strike, if they're forced to go into in person, I think has brought up some of the concerns brought up here. So first of all, these teachers are certainly relatively privileged because they have a union, right? And the wages, especially if you're a higher seniority worker, can be higher, you know, double what a worker would get in many other industries. And that's in some ways a disadvantage. The bosses are saying, "Oh, you rich people, you stop complaining," etc. But what have they done is, and it's still going on right now, and I think we should support these teachers in this union, is wage, as much as they can, a class-wide struggle. So their demands are not just, hey, us teachers should get the vaccine before other people, but that the students and especially Black and brown students that are disproportionate, about 80% of the schools, public schools, you know, I have a daughter in public schools myself, is that this is a social justice issue for the whole class. And they've been able to use their strike power to bring this serious discussion. And it's a problem for the ruling class in Chicago right now, because we're able to organize meetings of Black workers to discuss broader issues, not just, you know, trade union issues, or what's considered, you know, wages and working conditions of workers directly, but are able to bring in political concerns. And I think that's an important thing that those who have unions and those who are fighting within them can help lead. Okay, the other thing I just say is I think there's a big opportunity. I know less about what's going on in UK, but the United States, man, the bosses, they've got two parties in my view, and they're really in trouble. And they're not showing any way forward in this crisis. And I think several people brought up capitalism on this call. I'll bring it up too. Isn't it so clear? You know, while people are fighting over this coronavirus, they're not distributing it, and they're not producing it and distributing it because they want to make a profit off of it. They're closing down hospitals. They're laying off you know, medical workers at the exact time. I mean, I've been at some of these public demonstrations and it's a systemic problem. You know, you talk to them, you know, interview a capitalist and say, look, you know, I can't make a profit off this. I can't do it. Sorry. Well, that's not what we need. That's not what working people need. What working people need should be a priority, because we're the majority of the population. We're the people doing the work, and it's particularly being showcased during this worldwide pandemic. So, you know, I'm hopeful that working people can start to build our own organizations independent of the bosses. You know, that includes things like CSB Con Lutas type of labor federation. I think that, you know, includes possibly a workers' party of some sort, some kind of way we can pull the fighting unions together from city to city and from country to country, where we can start to put forward another way forward, where working people make the decisions because we do the work. So I'll leave it on that. I want to thank again everyone for the international solidarity. We intend to win my job back as an example. And to force the Chicago Transit Authority and the city leaders, supposed leaders, that if they touch any one of us or any other worker leader or someone who stands up, they're going to pay a much higher political price. And so that's what we're doing so far, and that's why we're intending to win. So again, thank you everyone for putting this together.
Yes, and thanks very much, Erek and Fabio, again for speaking. This has been really great to hear from yourselves and others on this about a lot of the stuff that's going on, and hopefully to bring some inspiration that these things can be done, and we can build these links and win these sorts of struggles. I think just to wrap up, just to say to everyone, if you're watching this on YouTube, there will be links in the descriptions which will say point to these campaigns and how you can support them. And also, this is, as I mentioned at the start, we're trying to do a lot of these meetings on the regular to try and encourage these conversations, encourage the conversations outside of the formal hierarchies of the business unions, and say that we talk about things that we might not otherwise get the chance to talk about. So in 2 weeks' time, at the same time as this meeting, we are having a meeting which touches on a lot of the same topics, really, because it's talking about it's particularly focused on the actions of one of PCS's self-organised equality groups, PCS Proud, dealing with LGBT rights, but also touches on a lot of internationalism. So hopefully people take the time to attend that. And then we're hoping next month to talk about anti-fascism and anti-racism in particular, and also about, in a separate meeting, talk about how we can use a lot of the digital tools that have come to prominence, particularly while we've had to work from home and organise in these kind of new ways, how we can use them to support the labour movement and support a lot of these struggles in different ways. And as the time goes on, we'll hopefully a lot more meetings touching on a lot more topics that will be of relevance to workers across the UK in particular, obviously, because that's where we're based, but also across the world, because all these issues, as has been drawn out, we're facing a lot of the same struggles at the same time. We're facing, the issues that face teachers in America are mirrored by issues that face teachers, issues that face transit workers, and so on and so forth. All these things are happening in almost identical ways in a lot of different countries. So yeah, thanks very much for taking the time out of your day, particularly from America, very, very early in the morning. So much appreciated for that. And thanks for everyone who's taken the time to take part, and hopefully see you again in future events.